Welcome to Caleb Can't Read.
He can't.
I'm Jordan
Because he's
Rabel.
dead. I'm Nicole Rabel.
Yeah, if you haven't heard it, Caleb's fucking dead, and there's just no ifs, ands, or buts around it. I think really it's best that
Not
we
a
just...
replacement. I'm just a stopgap.
Yeah, we're just going to keep trudging on. I know that's what he would have wanted, so we're just going to keep doing it. So, anyway, hey, how old were you when you learned to read?
Oh, God. I don't...
I know this is a weird question, but were you self-taught? I know that people talk about that.
No.
I was actually self-taught, and I don't know. Yeah, but I don't know how that works.
Wow, what a fancy little ingenue you are.
I don't know what that means, but I'm
grandmother...
offended. Oh, your grandmother was a mean school teacher.
She was a saint, also a mean school teacher. She frightened me into making Hooked on Phonics work.
Yeah, because that's actually a program that's been proven not to work. So it's kind of funny
how
that
I learned to read.
Yeah, it's kind of fucked up.
Yeah, I don't know.
I was like 3 years old, already reading.
Wow.
James Joyce, and
I think I was 10 years old when I learned to read.
No,
I wasn't 10. I was younger than that, but still.
No, don't get me wrong. I was a very stupid child.
I was 5.
Was it 5? It has to be 5. 10
Yeah,
years old
5.
is way hella old to learn to read.
Yeah,
Sorry,
but 5.
everyone. But
it was like there was a very embarrassing moment of like kindergarten where it was like, okay, everybody, if you can read a book, you can go up in front of the class and read. And I teamed up.
Oh, that's
with a
horrible!
classmate.
I would never do that.
A classmate convinced me to go up with them to read, and neither of us could. So.
What a weird thing for the teacher to think was just a good idea.
They would give you a certificate. We were aiming for certification.
But instead, all that they gave you guys was public embarrassment.
Pretty much.
And a very lasting memory, it sounds like. Good.
Yeah. I mean, to this day, I have trouble in front of, like, people.
Yeah. Yeah, you do.
I don't know.
Just don't think about the fact that this is being recorded for the internet forever.
I know therapy is a valid option, but also that does mean I have to talk in front of a stranger.
That's true. Yes,
so
this is very
I can't do
Ouroboros
it.
of problems.
I cannot do it. Oh God.
Well, let's get started, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
The Dawson family story begins immediately after the Civil War, when Mr. Lester, the plantation owner, came out into the fields with a letter in his hand announcing that the South had lost and everyone in his employ were now freed slaves, including the Dawsons. He said they could leave if they want, but anyone that wanted to stay could, and they'd be earning a fair wage. No one said or did anything until Mr. Lester was back in his house, but once he was, everyone immediately started talking about what the fuck they were going to do. Of course, some people instantly ran off to the north, but the Dawsons, then consisting of Sylvie and her daughter Charity, stayed. But as it would turn out, this would be the wrong choice, as the family running the plantation now had a bill of service for everyone under their employ for all the years they kept them fed and sheltered, and they would now need to pay it back.
Yeah.
I've been in living situations that are actually kind of like this.
This is, and nothing ever changed ever again.
It's just pretty much landlords in general.
God.
So why are you keeping my deposit? Paint.
Because you owe me.
Yeah.
You owe me your life.
So it took some years, but rather than run off and risk getting lynched, the Dawsons eventually paid back their debts. I couldn't tell you how long it took, but I know it took a while, since the Dawson family now consisted of Sylvie, her daughter Charity, and Charity's teenage son Harrison. Together, they took off for the north out of Mississippi.
Good for them.
Yeah. They'd heard things were better, but to them, they didn't see much difference once they got there, except that it was now colder, which would be an issue as they were hoping to run a cotton farm of their very own. Instead, the Dawsons moved to West Texas, just outside Marshall, where the family was able to use their freed slave status to get themselves a bit of land and a donkey. Now, Marshall wasn't a huge town, but it was a hub for people just over the Louisiana border. I think I said West Texas. I think what I meant to say was east.
Does it really matter? It's huge, and it's Texas, and...
Yeah, but if Louisiana is not on the left side of things, then that would make it on the right.
On a good day, you are neither frying from the heat or freezing from the cold, because they don't get
they have their own power grid. Yeah. How's that libertarianism working out for you?
Yeah, some problems.
Anyway, so it was there.
Don't mess with Texas. Unless,
you know that was actually from a littering campaign?
And now that there's
that every time that there's a little short dude in cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, it's just like, don't mess with Texas. It's like, yes, man, give a hoot, don't pollute, aggro, you fucking idiot.
Yeah. Like, don't fuck with me. No. It's not like that. Keep it tidy.
So there in Marshall, Harrison, the youngest of the family, was able to find work at a local lumber mill, where during the night, he'd take scrap wood from the mill and build his family a home on their own property. It was a small cabin with dirt floors, which had a dedicated room for the family to treat the cotton which they grew, and make a nice little business for themselves selling it in town. It was here that Harrison would raise a family, including the first of his 13 children, born January 19th, 1898, and the subject of today's episode, George Dawson.
13. All from one woman.
Yeah.
Fuck's sake.
They were building a farm.
Yeah, I guess it's Texas. Reproductive rights? What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. So anyway, the way George Dawson would later begin his memoir was with one of his very first memories. He was out in town with his father when he was about 5 or 6 years old, and his father had taken George to the candy store as a reward for his work over the last year helping with harvest. He remembers his father's words on the way to town, quote, "Life is good. I do believe it's getting better."
This is going to be a sad one. This is going to be such a fucking bummer, isn't it?
I'm just mentioning his nice words. There's nothing wrong with this.
Shitty things happen to optimistic people in real life. It's fucking science.
It probably should be studied, actually. Now, George says, now when he walked up to the register, this white guy behind the counter just sort of stared at him with suspicion and anger. Yep. And it's like, calm down, dude. He's 6.
It's Texas.
But little George opened up his hand to show a penny. And his father said something like, "Take your time, son. You did a man's work this year." It wasn't often that George got alone time with his dad, and he was happy that he didn't need to share him with the rest of his siblings. All the kids worked, but George was old enough to be rewarded. And by the way, just to make the work easier and kind of a reward on its own, George's dad gave all of his kids a shot of hooch to start the day.
Sorry.
Every fucking day.
Is George like the youngest or the oldest?
He's technically the oldest. He doesn't have 13 yet. I'm just saying he will go on to have 13 and he's only 6 years old. Yeah, no, just give your hips a rest. It was at this point he only had like two other siblings, maybe 3. And so it's like they were all working.
Some kind of deity would have to be involved for that.
It fucking seems that she should be a saint.
And all of them
that woman is in a wheelchair.
All of them lived to like a normal age?
I don't know, actually. I want to say pretty much, yeah. I mean, I would say that maybe the youngest died in their teens, maybe.
But probably due to some kind of freak accident or racism.
I don't think it was the racism.
So freak accident.
Freak accident, though. Yeah. Yes. I mean, they were still working on a fucking cotton mill. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, anyway.
Work accident.
Yes. George hands over his penny to the guy at the register, and he gets a peppermint stick in return. But before he can even taste it, there's a commotion outside and people shouting. George looks to his dad, who looks worried, and then he looks to the candy shop owner, who's looking out the window with a huge fucking grin.
Ew.
Everyone heads outside.
I hope that guy is like burning.
You know that he lived to a ripe old age and had no consequences for anything in his life. Everyone heads outside, and they watch as a 17-year-old black kid named Pete Spillman gets manhandled by the crowd. According to George, Pete was very well liked. There was like one time a kid at a swimming hole who jumped in a little too close to the rocks, and no one figured they could make it out to him safely. But Pete went in anyway and saved the kid's life. And just the week before this, Pete had given George a baseball, something that didn't exactly come cheap. Well, it was only later that George and his father would get the full story. You see, the Dawsons found out from this white family's cook that saw the whole inciting incident herself that the dad from this family started just beating the shit out of his daughter because she was getting visibly pregnant. Always a good thing to, do to a pregnant woman. And the dad just kind of stops to say, I'm just going to beat you harder the more you complain. But if you was raped, and his daughter Betty Jo just kind of goes, meh. So the dad starts listing off names of likely suspects, but it's pretty clear that Betty Jo isn't going to give anyone up. What?
Buckhead Betty.
Yeah. But when he kind of sighs and says, okay, well, fine. Was it Pete then? The boy you basically don't know who doesn't show up for work sometimes, so it wouldn't be a big deal to either of us if he dies? And Betty Jo just nods.
Is it really Betty Jo?
Yeah.
Wow, I thought you were just making that up.
No. This is Texas.
Betty Jo, Betty Lynn.
Yeah. Now we have
Betty Ann.
We have all, of course, heard lynching stories, but basically on this podcast, some of the stories you read in books are made up. They were closely associated. I wish
this was made up.
Yeah, I know. No, this is going to be Caleb Can't Read's first real lynching account.
God damn it.
The stories that we've covered before, on this podcast, were closely associated with people like Harper Lee or Ralph Ellison, but to my knowledge, neither of them actually witnessed a hanging. George Dawson, on the other hand, talks about this incident in such sickening detail.
Well, those other two writers were white?
Ralph Ellison isn't. No, he was like the guy who kicked off the civil rights movement.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. But
I'm sorry. I am not a consistent listener to Caleb Can't Read.
It's okay. Caleb isn't either. He would have the same questions.
Don't worry. They hired me on it basically, they hired me because I was cheap.
I am not paying you.
See? Cheap.
So, but the things that George doesn't mention in this account, you can almost tell he doesn't want to think about it anymore, so he just rushes to the end of the chapter. But he talks about things I wouldn't have begun to imagine, like the rope being tied around a horseshoe and thrown over a branch to make it easier, or the sheriff showing up to be told, quote, "This ain't your show." Now, yes, this is a very gruesome story for a fucking child like George to witness, but to me, his dad had him around for simply one of two reasons. He either couldn't leave, otherwise he'd be seen as a dissident by the crowd, or he wanted to show George a very harsh fucking lesson. To quote George...
How old was George at this
time?
5
or 6 years old.
Jesus Christ, way to start it young.
Yeah. To quote George, "It let me know how things were and kept me safe." When the deed is done and the Dawsons are finally able to go home, George says to his dad that he will never talk or work for a white person as long as he lives. And his dad actually you got to remember, a harsh thing, yes, but he is a child who just witnessed this. He really has no understanding. And his dad actually stops the cart and says, quote, "No, you will work for white folks. You will talk to them." Because as little as George was, don't forget, the youngest person on death row was a 14-year-old black kid named George Stinney. Emmett Till was 14 too. There's only so much that people gave a shit about back then in regards to when they saw you as an adult. And George mentions it later in his memoirs too. The KKK were very prevalent in Marshall, Texas, but you didn't avoid them. You couldn't. You were just nicer to them. I actually ran into this as I was like, yeah, how old was Emmett Till when I remember doing this? I found out the bitch that got him killed, she died very recently. That is not ancient history.
What is her name?
I feel like it was Caroline something.
God damn it.
I know. And
you know
what?
Know this.
I know, but you know what?
I was hoping you'd say her name.
Look, here's the thing.
So that anybody listening, on the offhand chance they were able to see her grave, would take a giant, fat, steamy shit.
I think that her name should be lost to history, but of course it isn't. And those that want to look up where her grave is, I'm sure it's very available online. Because here's the thing. She did not fucking regret doing that shit. If you don't know the story of Emmett Till, don't go give any money to the fucking studio that made a movie about the Emmett Till incident. I think it was called Emmett or something. It just seemed in bad taste. Nobody asked for that. And honestly, I don't trust Hollywood to make things a little bit more palpable for audiences. The Emmett Till story absolutely needs to be taught in schools and should be shown. Those pictures stay with you, and they need to be seen. Again, this shit is pretty fucking fresh. This bitch is shown very often to have been like, well, I didn't mean for him to get in so much trouble. No, she wrote an autobiography towards the end of her life, and guess what? She said, yeah, it sucks that it happened to Emmett Till, but I am not somebody that you catcall. And it's like, I am sorry, bitch, but you do not understand.
She got a child killed.
A child killed, yes. And and I'm sorry, he did not catcall. She says, oh, it was a wolf whistle or whatever the fuck like that. Like, you should not do that to a lady, and I'm sorry that happened to him, but I am also a victim. No, you're not. No, you're fucking not, dude. Honestly, I don't doubt that he was fucking whistling something from goddamn Looney Tunes when it happened. And she just goes, oh, I see somebody I don't like. Yeah. Oh, the dog knows I'm upset. And I will say the guy who, if you'll listen back to our Anne Frank episodes, the guy who was the arresting
pile
officer,
of shit on his grave.
His
what
grave is
names?
very out in the open, and it is very easy to find too. Anyway, when George Dawson got back home with his dad, he said, quote, after we got home, I found my peppermint was still in my pocket. I scraped off the lint and the dirt. I gave it to one of my sisters. My taste for it had disappeared. 90 years later, I still don't like peppermint. About 6 months after the lynching, Betty Jo had her baby. It was a boy, a little white boy. No one said nothing. So as George grows up, he's friendly enough with white and black kids just the same, but he says that when you turn 8 is when you have to go to a segregated school. Now, back in his time, there wasn't even a school for black kids in his area yet, so it meant at just 8 years old, George Dawson was contracted to work at a hog farm for $1.50 a week. That very summer, a black school was built, but it was already too late for him to attend. He couldn't just quit, or there would be trouble from his employers. They basically owned him now. Instead, George had to live vicariously through his little brother Johnny, who did get to go to school and who impressed his whole family by one day pulling the family Bible off the shelf, the only book they owned, and started reading from it freely. Johnny Dawson was the first in their family to learn how to read. Now back then, whether or not you could read didn't really matter. You had a special Bible that would have the family tree inscribed in the front pages regardless. But for the Dawsons, whenever anyone was born or died, they'd have to bring the Bible to a black preacher for him to record the names himself. I feel like that was something that, like, yeah, there were Bible salesmen and shit back in the day, but, like, I don't think that your family ever had one, did they?
What do you mean?
Well, like, because your grandparents were very old school.
Hella Catholic.
I know, they were very old school.
There were multiple Bibles.
But was there like a happy birthday, thanks. But was there like a family Bible or anything that you guys had?
I don't know about family Bible. They're just, they're just Bibles.
Everywhere.
Yeah. Multiple Bibles. I don't know.
I still lift a couch to like
There's
vacuum and find a fucking rosary every so often. It's like, damn.
Often, the rosary, the Bible, ribbons in all of them because for whatever reason, Lolo was just bookmarking
his favorite passages.
His favorite Bible verses.
Why were they always on Revelation? That's so weird. No.
He just like the carnage.
It's pretty cool, actually.
No,
it's pretty fucking sick. That
would be more Lola's style.
Oh, yeah. The school teacher. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, as George continued life working at various farms, he talks about all these momentous changes happening in the world that he could only see from the sidelines. He says he remembers working in the fields one day when he hears this huge buzzing sound like a cloud of hornets were about to sweep over the land, and he looks up and sees these two guys in an airplane flying low. And his dad just tells his kids to soak it in, because airplanes are a passing fad. Hell, the city of Marshall didn't even have cars for the longest time, simply because it was thought they would scare the horses. For years, George's life would be the same week after week. He would work at the farm his employers owned, and then on Sundays, his one day off, he'd have to travel back to his parents' farm and work that too. As he got older, nothing really changed.
I'm so tired listening.
I know.
God.
Yeah. Do you remember it in our second apartment? Mm-hmm. We had that one downstairs neighbor, that guy, and he was so proud of pulling like 80-hour weeks. He was like, yeah, man, sometimes I don't even go home.
I don't even remember that guy. I remember the old lady who was just like...
Oh, in the first apartment upstairs?
Oh, you meant the second apartment.
Yeah, second one. Yeah. The second apartment, There was that dude downstairs. He was always practicing his golf swing like he would ever have time for it. And he's just like, man, I don't know. Buster dug him. But like, he was a nice guy, but he was just so proud of working like 80-hour weeks. He's like, man, sometimes I sleep under the work desk. Haha. And I'm like, dude, this ain't it. Like,
no.
you'd have a better life working at McDonald's. Whatever you're doing is shit. So anyway, as George gets older, nothing really changes. And he kind of figures this is it for him. Like, this is life as a colored man.
Aye.
Quote, at night, I rubbed the stitching of Pete's baseball and knew how bad it could be. I didn't want to die, but I didn't know what to do either. Now, one thing that both humbled and haunted George and made him the passive man he'd grow to be was his family donkey, Blue. There isn't much to the story other than George got angry at Blue one day and threw a rock at his head.
No.
Unfortunately, he nailed Blue right in the fucking eye,
no.
blinding him. I know.
Oh, baby.
Blue was the donkey George's father started his farm with and the one George grew up with. Like, donkeys live for something like 40, 45 years. So after the incident, whenever George went back home and saw Blue's one bad eye, he was reminded to keep his cool in every situation. As George gets older, around the time he's...
It's all the worst life lessons.
I know. I mean, in that environment, I don't know where else he would find the life lessons, though. Like, one time I got bit by a rattler, and that reminded me to, like, always bet on black or something. You know...
My father and the other adults around me forced me to watch a lynching, so now I have to mind my manners in front of white people.
It fucking worked. Something he never presses on in his memoirs, though, is something that I'm really interested in, which is like his family dynamic with his siblings. Because like his siblings, like as time goes on, he for sure, I feel like got the brunt of the damage as far as like horrific things. Like, to see a lynching at 5 or 6 years old, and hopefully his siblings never saw any of that shit. But how many times did, like, his brother Johnny pull down the Bible and be like, hey, you guys want to hear another story? And George is just there on his, like, one shot of hooch that his dad gave him in the morning, just like, you guys want to hear a fucking story? Yeah, no, put that away, Johnny. Let me tell you guys about Pete. As George gets older, around the time he's a teenager, he notices he's beginning to get treated a lot different by the white people in town.
Uh-oh.
They don't like talking to him as much, honestly, because, you know, he's not a cute kid anymore. He's like a teenager. And he's not getting the same greetings and smiles like he used to. And like I said before, you may be a man when you're 18 and white, but you're seen as a man a lot sooner when you're black, and therefore able to be dealt a man's punishment. And George knows it's time to watch his ass when his uncle just looks at, like, how big he's gotten, and he tells him out of the blue, you know, it's a white man that will decide when a colored man is in trouble. For George, this ends up happening a lot sooner rather than later, but not necessarily in a bad way. As World War I approaches...
This is a real fucking roller coaster.
As World War I approaches...
Jesus Christ.
George's boss comes up to him with a piece of paper, telling him to sign an X on the dotted line. And George just has to trust him and whatever it may say, because George still can't read. Quote, even then, I knew that you don't argue with your boss. I put my X on the paper he had. That kept me at his mill and out of the army. I guess the paper that he had would have made me seem younger, too young for the World War. But of course, not everyone was as lucky as George. There was a friend of his that got enlisted and had to go to France, but when he came back, he just seemed angrier than he was before. Not because of PTSD, though I'm sure he had that too. No, he was mad at the way things were. So when George greets him, he's like, hey man, it's great that you're back. And he's like, yeah, great to be here. Hey, did you know that black and white people eat together in France? And George literally has to be walked through how the fuck that's even possible. He's like, Man,
Culture shock.
That's crazy that all the restaurants are big enough to have a white and colored section. And the guy's like, no, man, no segregation. Not with their water fountains, not with their hotels, not even with their fucking bathrooms. You can walk around like a free man out there. And George just shakes his head like, gosh, France sure sounds like an alien world. Like, he literally is just like, what is this, Disneyland? This is crazy. What?
What a fantasy.
Yeah, it's so sad.
What a liar Lyington you are.
Now, back in the day, big companies used to form baseball teams and have their employees go up against each other just as like a promotion for their brand.
God.
I actually think this is... Okay, I don't think I've ever brought this up on the podcast before, but my grandfather was actually like I think he did play for the major leagues for a little bit, for like maybe a season or two. No, well, he started off though, like, so he's from bumfuck Oregon, where he was working for like Sawmill baseball teams, I think. He
didn't play for Bob's Sawmill?
No, actually, they were called the Milk Drivers, I think.
Oh.
Yeah, like... Just the most sexual name they could have possibly given my
for
grandpa.
The Big Mommy Milkers.
Yeah.
It's, I can't remember, your Grandpa Rabel.
No, this wasn't Grandpa Rabel, by the way, so
sorry.
don't worry about it.
Grandpa Grant. I'm sorry.
Oh, you got it. Yeah, there you go. The amount of times that we see my family
Grandpa
is
Grant.
like nil, so I don't blame you.
Yeah, sorry, Grandpa Rabel.
But yeah, everyone we're talking about today is dead. Our grandparents, Caleb. But anyway, so...
Just in time for Halloween. Spooky season is upon us.
We should try to raise Caleb with a Ouija board.
Oh my God. I have been campaigning for that. Let's get the Gnostics and like research, because maybe there's some like weird Catholic ritual.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
Christianity ritual. So then that way my grandfather won't be disappointed in me and we can still raise him from the dead.
For tax reasons?
No, just because I miss my Lolo.
Oh, okay. We could also register something on like a W-2 as like a dependent too. I think that we could probably make this happen. So anyway, yeah, my grandfather, I'm pretty sure that's how he got his start. And then he went on to like, I think play for the White Sox or Red Sox. I don't know. Milkers. For the Milkers. Anyway, so yeah, people would just go out here to like watch baseball games, but it was also like at the same time, like a commercial for two competing companies, So
it's so fucking dystopian.
It is.
It really depresses me to find out, because I have this theory that we are now living in the cyberpunk times. This is dystopia.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a theory.
It's no longer
it's
sci-fi. This is what it is.
Yeah.
And it's disheartening to hear that it was happening as far back as fucking
Yeah, but back then it was called coal punk. So anyway... So George gets put on this baseball team as a catcher, and the team's good enough that they actually end up going on tour.
Nice.
So his team goes all over the state, but whenever they get to a restaurant, which was always white only, they'd have to draw straws to see who would have to go up to the counter, where they were, of course, always told, sorry, whites only. But the follow-up question was always, yes, sir, but can you make us sandwiches and bring them out to the bus? And according to George, most times this worked out just fine. But he hated being the one to go in there because of the uncertainty of it all, especially when every once in a while he would get a server that would just yell out, "Can't you read?" Because, you see, even into his 20s, George Dawson still can't read. But of course, if he tells the server that he can't read, they just beat him up for being a smartass, But because of these interactions alone, it gave George Dawson the first two words that he could ever read for decades to come. Whites only. Now back then, just like everything else, the baseball teams were also segregated. And on one occasion, George's team goes up against this white team in another town.
Oh no.
Well, the white guys have a star pitcher, and everyone's sure they're going to get clobbered by this guy. But George watches him warm up. And he notices that the way this guy's pitching, he's using up all his energy to throw. So George tells his team to play loose in the first half, save their energy, but give it their all in the second. Sure enough, as George's team starts to win, the people in the bleachers start cussing out the umpire. Then they start cussing out the teams. But in the bottom of the ninth, with George Dawson as the last hitter on home plate, they start cussing out George.
Oh, no.
George hits a home run, but as he starts rounding first base, he sees the people spilling out of the bleachers.
Oh.
And as he rounds second, he sees that his own team's dugout is already empty.
Uh-oh. Why did he bother?
I don't think he noticed. And so he looks around the... What?
Are you going to finish by saying that he finished out a home run before legging it to the bus?
Like half. He looked around the field and saw that his team's bus was ready to go and his coach was actually waving for him to get the fuck inside.
Oh my
so
God.
George completely skips third base and makes sure to stomp on home plate before continuing to run all the way onto the bus just as people start hammering on their windows with fucking rocks. After that...
I'm surprised. So, what? He beat them? He beat the crowd to the bus?
Yes.
Okay.
And after that...
For a hot second, I'm imagining they're already surrounding the bus while he's like running into the door, and I'm surprised no one grabbed him.
They were fast, but he was faster. Yeah.
Well, yeah, he's the athlete, and they're just the fatties in the stand.
Yeah.
Speaking as a fatty myself.
But after that, George Dawson decided he didn't really like baseball.
That's fair.
So at 21, George's dad tells him it's time to spread his wings and move out. However, George has almost zero savings, and everything he's made thus far has gone to his family.
Super relatable.
He doesn't really have any possessions, so he decides
Also relatable.
He decides the best way to see the world and look for work is train hopping. Relatable. Now George does get a friend to go with him, and they manage to make their way to Texarkana. But one thing they have to watch out for on every stop are what are called bulls. Now, Nicole, you were actually born in a train car, so I know that you know what these are. But for anyone else out there, bulls are what they call the security guards at train depots who make sure there are no homeless guys train hopping. Well, they're not cops.
Cop snitches. They snitch 2 cops.
No, they deal with it themselves. That's why they're called bulls, because they'll run you over and not give a shit. Well, George and his friend are good about dodging the bulls, but one day the train starts moving like it's leaving the depot, and George's friend decides to sit out on the edge of the train car, stick his legs out the door, because he figures the train is already moving. Like, what the hell are the bulls going to do about it now?
Nope.
Well,
if it's not moving fast enough.
Exactly. Well, the shot rings out, and George is like, God. Dude, get the fuck back inside the train. But his friend's like, relax, they're just doing that to scare us. Another shot rings out and completely shatters his friend's fucking knee. So he goes tumbling out of the train car, and George actually jumps out after him.
Oh, no.
But as George looks at the bull who shot his friend, thinking they're either going to be killed or arrested, the guy just kind of shrugs and then leaves. He's like, all right, job done. At least you're not on the train anymore. That is a man dedicated to work.
They don't pay him enough to
finish the job. No, he's just like, no, I'm not a racist. God, no, I'm just an asshole. I'm just a violent abuser. But yeah, so he doesn't escort them out or anything. He just leaves them to figure it out, just bleeding in the middle of the train yard. Well, luckily, there were a whole bunch of other homeless guys on other train cars that neither George nor his friend knew were on the train.
Oh, God.
And they just start pouring out to help his friend get to a hospital.
Good.
I know. I was like, a part of me though was just like, and kill that guy, right? But it was like, no, they were immediately like, let's get him to a hospital. And I didn't write this on there, but like they ended up needing, so like if I remember right, maybe the ambulance itself was it was whites only, I think. And so they had to get like a taxi that would pick them up as black people. And then the taxi had to turn around when he realized that they were going to the hospital, because he was like, oh, you're black. You have to go to a black hospital. Yeah. Just absolute shit.
Yeah, that tracks.
Now, this incident may have led to George's friend not to train hop anymore. I can't say for sure. But for George, it was his main mode of transportation, so he had to keep going. Just traveled throughout the southern United States taking odd jobs, including building levees on the Mississippi River, which he was always very proud of. He saw it as man's taming of nature. But as great of a worker as George was, Whenever his bosses would want him to stay on as a supervisor, he'd kind of see that as his time to leave. Because he knew that if someone, especially his white employers, found out that he was so illiterate that he couldn't even fill out the supervisor application, then it wouldn't be long before they'd find a way to fuck him over. Even when the civil rights movement came around and laws got passed allowing George to apply for better positions, he was stuck at entry level.
Those laws would only matter if you had people willing to enforce them too.
Well, yes, but he was always stuck at entry level for the rest of his life because he was afraid of getting swindled. One instance of this is when George tried getting to another state for work. Oh, no. He had trouble buying the train ticket, and the white gentleman at the desk could tell he was having some issues. So he asked George where it was he was trying to get to, and when George told him, the guy was like, "Great, here's your ticket to get there, but when you reach this one city first, you need to get off to change trains, you understand?" But when George tries boarding the second train, he's stopped. Turns out the guy sold him a ticket that would only take him as far as that first city and then pocketed the rest of the cash. And of course, when George tried to explain this to the guys that were stopping him from boarding the second train, they were like, "Wow, sounds a lot like you're accusing a white man of stealing from you, George." So he had to just leave. Which sucks because it's like, now I'm stuck in blank city, wherever the fuck he was, and it's like, I now have zero plans. But because George led a very nomadic lifestyle, it meant he saw plenty of good and bad on his travels. Learned that you could double your money gambling.
Know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
See, that's all I'm trying to tell you. Let's just take whatever we're going to spend on our...
when to walk away.
On our rent, and let's just gamble. It's very simple.
Yeah, fuck you, all right.
You know how much I don't care to gamble.
I know.
Were you ever into... you just don't know how to play the games. Would you be into them if you were, more knowledgeable?
No, because I hate losing money. The most I will ever gamble is, let's get a $2 quick pick for the lottery while I get this popsicle.
I don't even know if I consider that gambling. You're not gambling on anything. You know you won't win.
Yeah.
It's just a sucker tax. But anyway... But as much as it seemed like George Dawson maybe wanted to get into gambling, his first night out in, I think, New Orleans at a gambling house was when he saw these guys fight and some guns got pulled.
Uh-oh.
So George just kind of abandoned that idea altogether. He did learn to pack some heat, though. He bought a pistol with a pearl grip for protection while he traveled the country, which honestly probably...
And thus, gun control initiatives were born. No.
Oh, because he was a black man with a gun? Okay, yeah, no, I gotcha.
Yeah.
No, actually, that probably doubled his chances of getting killed himself. I don't know why he thought that was a good idea.
Yeah.
No, I don't know, though. I mean, I'm sure that actually would have helped in smaller crowds of, white people looking to lynch or something. I get that. But, yeah, no, all that they need is the excuse,
it just feels like a damn
too,
do, damn don't.
Yeah, pretty much. But George Dawson ends up seeing both borders of the United States while he's away. He makes it as far up as Canada just to see some snow. But by the time he makes it up there, it's already summer. And when he walks into the saloon, these grizzled white lumberjacks just stop what they're doing like it's fucking Western. Like, "Why you here, boy?" And George doesn't even know what to say, so he's just honest about it. He's like, I wanted to see some snow. And they were like, "In summer? Well, shit, we'll take you to see some snow." And they kind of forced George to go on a car ride with them out to this fucking valley to play in the snow, and then they just go back to town. But George's journey to the other side of the United States is a little more humbling. He makes it down to Mexico and sees for himself that things don't actually need to stay as shitty as they are back in Texas. He sees a white dude go into one of the train cars and a black guy follow, and George actually stops this guy like, "Whoa, you almost got yourself lynched." But the guy shows George that the train cars in Mexico aren't segregated, and people there give such little shit about his skin color that he actually ends up sharing a cup of water with a dude who's light-skinned. And eventually, George figures for all of his adventuring, he's going to make the biggest leap of all. He's going to board a ship to India.
Oh, that was a jump.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I'm tired of the East Coast, so yeah. Now, supposedly, his great-great-grandmother was from India before she was enslaved and sold in America. So maybe he figures like he'd head back to where it all started or something. I'm not really sure what his thought process was on this, besides it seemed like a change of pace. And him bringing up his great-grandmother coming from India is like the only thing that I can think of where it's like, how else would he have found out that India even exists, really? Mm-hmm. I don't think that he was necessarily down for book learning or like anything else if he couldn't really read, and he's not asking somebody to like teach him anything. So it's like, where the fuck did he get India in mind? So maybe he was just like, I don't know, Indiana's right there. So maybe India's just maybe it's a hop, skip, and a jump away, you know?
Yeah. I like it. Like, I don't know.
Well, either way.
Yeah.
George doesn't make it there. What happens is that George gets to the boat he's supposed to board way early. So he unpacks all his shit and figures, well, hell, I've got a few hours to kill. And he goes out on the town to try and get laid. He said he was really working some magic on these two girls, and he almost had them before he realized the boat had long left the harbor.
Oh, no.
Quote, all of a sudden, I had no ship.
With all of his stuff?
Yeah.
Fuck's sake.
I had no ship, I had no rooming house, and I had no girlfriend. I could read the signs. It was time to hit the rails again.
I thought you said he couldn't read.
I know. It was a clever little wordplay on his part. Probably. I don't think it was intentional. In all the time that George Dawson had been gone from home, only 5 years had actually passed. And because he couldn't read or write, he never sent out any letters to his family letting them know where he'd been or if he was even okay. So
they knew he couldn't read.
Yeah. But like, I'm sure
it's basically just one of those things where they just kind of, you know.
Couldn't he have asked somebody? There's telegrams.
Have a prayer. Oh, true.
Like
no, that costs money though.
Well, sure. I don't know. It feels like something could have been done instead of just being like,
also,
fucked off.
Who's to say that, that telegram would actually be there? Like, the person running it, they could just be an ill-intentioned white person.
That's
like,
true.
Yeah, sure, I'll take your money and just pretend to send a telegram, like, spelling out,
boop,
like,
boop, 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 boop. And they're just, did you do it? Yep, that's $20. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. No, that's his biggest thing, though, is he has a huge mistrust of other people. Like, he does not trust anyone.
Very fair.
It's extremely fair. Like, I will say, his memoirs, the way people talked about him in interviews and shit, he seems like the nicest fucking guy. But I 100% do not blame him with any ill intention he has towards anybody. Like, I get it.
Because he was raised to treat everyone very, very politely, because you could not.
Yes, because that would also get you killed.
Like, yeah. You're old enough now to understand.
Yeah.
The tender age of 6 years old. White people decide your fate.
Mm-hmm. So, when George gets back home at the age of 26 in Marshall, Texas, it's actually quite a surprise to his family.
Well, yeah.
They'd actually...
never fucking wrote or anything.
They'd actually come to terms with the fact that they'd probably just never see him again.
Oh, God.
Like, they were just like, yeah, no, he's probably dead.
God,
like,
I thought you were gone, like, forever. Like,
I mean, 5 years is a long fucking time.
With no word.
Well, back in Marshall, George gets a job at a ranch breaking wild horses, and crowds would often form at the fences so they could just watch people get hurt. I mean...
Yeah.
I would do the same.
Old pastime.
Yeah, there's no television. Come on.
Yeah.
Now, there was this one particular problem child of Annapaloosa that George was afraid of facing. But when he saw this gorgeous chick hanging off the fence, he was like, hell yeah, time to be amazing. But after like a minute of getting absolutely shit-rocked by this horse, he caught glimpses from the crowd and how worried they looked, and he was like, this was a bad fucking idea. But then he heard the pretty lady say, quote, that man is a damn fool. And George was like, hell yeah, got her.
Oh my God.
So naturally, after George manages to tire the horse out and rein them in, he walks straight over to the young lady and introduces himself.
Naturally.
And I will say, George Dawson probably made himself sound a lot smoother in this section than he really was after getting thrown around by a horse. Like, he probably looked like shit.
Yeah.
Appaloosas are terrible horses.
Are they the big ones?
They're not. No, I feel like you're probably thinking of a Clydesdale. like the Budweiser horse.
The hairy feet.
No, Appaloosas are like, they're smaller and skinnier, but they're real fucking spry, and they like to, I don't know, they're kind of like the Dalmatians of horses.
So what they use for horse racing?
No, I don't feel like.
I don't know.
No, I don't think they do, because Appaloosas, they're shitty horses. They're very hard to train to do what the fuck you want them to do.
Fair enough.
And that's like, my mom would only ever talk about, like, you know, growing up on the farm, she was like, yeah, we had a horse named, an Appaloosa named Slip Up, because it was a mistake. And we didn't mean for that horse to get pregnant. But, like, she was like, that horse almost threw me off into a fucking ravine. Like, I almost died because like, Appaloosas suck.
In an alternate timeline.
I would have never been born.
Lucky.
Well, not long after they meet, in 1926, George Dawson would be wed to Alzenia Arnold. I could find...
Wait, was that the girl who was like, that man's a damn fool?
Yeah, he got her.
I was about to call her Appaloosa, but...
that's the horse.
Breed.
Her name is Alzenia Arnold, and I could find no mentions of Alzenia's age online, but George would have been about 28. Overall, George would marry a total of 4 times and outlive every one of his wives.
Wait, they all died?
Yeah.
They didn't just leave him? They just...
As far as
mysteriously passed?
Well, that's the thing. I can't say for certain that they were married at the time of each of their deaths. I just know that he outlived everyone.
That becomes a horse of a different color.
I'm also not sure which children were the product of which marriages, but altogether, George would have 7 children. Novella, George Jr., Dorothy, Cecilia, Billie Jean, Daryl, and one more I couldn't find a name for.
At least they all got to, like, spread the load versus his mother. Like,
oh, yeah, for fucking 13 children.
A baker's dozen.
Yeah, but apparently George Dawson's daughter Cecilia is the grandmother to the guy who played Chidi on The Good Place, which I thought was neat.
Chidi!
I know. And I reached out to him on his old Instagram account. I don't think he ever saw it, but that's okay.
That's fine. Don't bother him. He's doing important,
he's
cute
too
man
cute.
things.
I know. He's too cute to be bothered.
He's too handsome to be bothered by us. We're goblins.
Anyway, to George, this was his purpose in life. To raise kids
to
raise kids in a better world than what he grew up in.
Aww.
And still just never learn to read. His wife Alzenia knew he was illiterate, but his kids didn't find out till his second eldest, George Jr., was already in high school. Like, he was a great dad. Didn't give him a shot of liquor each morning or anything, but he still managed.
Good start.
He already managed.
I feel like that's like one of the minimums.
I know. Well, it depends on who you ask. But he still managed to help his kids with their homework. Apparently, whenever they would ask for help, George would do that thing that's like, okay, read me the question. Great. What do you think that means? And they all thought he was just being a dad, but, like, in reality, no, he really needed their help understanding the questions. But as the days wore on, George started to see his family drop. At first it was his mother, then his father, who managed to reach the age of 99, and eventually his own children.
Oh.
George Dawson was outliving everybody. He was in his 90s himself, and still, after all this time, he still couldn't fucking read. He'd been retired.
Is that what you mean? Like, just time, through the passage of time, his family members were dying?
Yes.
It's not freak accidents and illness.
No, I never once said that it was.
Well, I don't know. You brought up, I was like...
Yeah, he would outlive all of his wives.
Where's this going?
No, he would outlive all of his lives. He lived to be 100.
And I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. His parents are going to be old. You know, that's kind of how it is. And then you bring up the children, and I'm like, uh-oh. Well,
No, he's just old as shit.
His children are dying?
Yeah, we're all dying.
I know.
It's not a horror novel.
They beat him to it.
Yeah. So anyway, he'd been retired since he turned 65, and in that time, he'd moved to Dallas to some small house that was in a terrible state of disrepair. Mm-hmm. Probably not when he first got it, but he wasn't really into maintenance. Ceilings sagged whenever it rained, the kitchen was pockmarked black from grease fires, and the walls were apparently only standing because the rot needed the walls to stay up so it could live on in its own little ecosystem.
That implies that the rot has sentience.
The rot does have sentience, and it is inside all of us. George Dawson spent his days fishing and little else. But one day there was a door-to-door solicitor that came by asking if there were...
Were they selling Hooked on Phonics? Is this how this ends?
Kind of.
That's how he learns how to finally read, is Hooked on Phonics.
Asking if there were any adults that wanted to join the school's adult education program. And with little else to do, George Dawson said, fuck it. In more accurate terms, he said, I was tired of fishing, but I think my way is better. Before him, the oldest attendee the program ever had was a woman in her 50s. Most people that joined the program were actually there just to get their GED. But when George Dawson showed up, the program saw their attendance numbers skyrocket. It started to get passed around town that there was a man in his goddamn 90s learning to read, and people wanted to get to know him. By the time he was 98 years old, George Dawson, who previously didn't even know the alphabet, finally learned to read.
Yay!
The story was a mild sensation in the news for a bit. You know, at 98, no longer a literate man turns the page, or never too late to learn, shit like that.
How positive.
Yeah, it went on to have several interviews in places like People magazine, and even showed up on Oprah alongside Carl Henry, his teacher. And this was all well and good for George and everything, but he really couldn't give a lesser shit about the notoriety. He was just super proud of no longer having to put an X where his signature should be. Like, he could actually spell his own name, and in cursive. Yet everyone made sure to take note of Dawson's age, with every interview managing to ask him how he made it to 98 years old. Quote, lately, there be lots of folks coming to ask me questions. It's always the same questions. They want to know what I eat, what I do to stay healthy. I've done what I want and never gave it much thought. Although the media circus eventually died down, George Dawson became a local celebrity, and he began focusing on his GED. It wasn't long after the excitement slowed down that a PE teacher out of Port Townsend, Washington, named Richard Globman, decided he wanted to meet George Dawson himself. It had been a couple years since the story of George's literacy had broken, but George was still alive and about to celebrate his 100th birthday.
What time frame is this? What decade are we in now?
At this point, this is about 1997.
Wow.
Yeah. Lots of reporters had initially come by to interview George for their little feel-good stories and left, but Richard really wanted to know the guy. Not knowing exactly where to start, Richard Globman went to the school George's teacher Carl Henry taught at and just kind of wandered in. Sure enough, there was George, old as shit, still attending classes. Over the course of the next several months, Richard became inspired by George's story and reached out to several publishers about maybe making a children's book about his life to inspire kids to read. Yeah, exactly.
Just some of the memories you've been sharing.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. No matter...
The most notable moments of his life, like...
Yeah.
How are you going to spin that?
He didn't try spinning it at all. What he tried to do was water it down, but no matter how much he did that, George's life was kind of fucking horrific. Like,
yeah, like, it just...
Yeah. The things that he thought were important, the lynching of Pete Spillman, George's friend getting shot while train hopping, getting chased off a fucking baseball field by a bunch of angry whites. It just seemed like a little too much.
Yeah.
Quote, 2 weeks later, I was told everybody liked it, but the rest of the conversation included terms like demographics and target audiences that had nothing to do with why I wrote it, but everything to do with why books were published. Richard was told the book had too many adult sensibilities for a children's book. So make it
a book for grown-ups.
Well, right. He's getting there.
All right.
Even though he thought George's story would go unpublished, Richard still hung around. Quote, one night he cooks dinner, the next night I cook dinner. Afterward, we do some dominoes and the loser does the dishes. Some nights we watch Jeopardy and some nights we just talk. But as time went on, Richard Globman started looking at publishers again, realizing just how important it was for George's story to still be told. Like I said before, there were plenty of stories out there from people who lived through the civil rights movement, but not a lot from people who witnessed just how bad things were in the South back in the no-no times. So Richard started to record George's stories, and he really wanted him to get all these angry feelings about injustice off his chest, you know?
Hell yeah.
But in reality, George was an extremely passive guy. His dad taught him, don't have no dealings with white people, because that was very much the world he grew up in. But George got to see things change, and he really didn't hate anybody or anything. Quote, "Do you have any regrets? I hurt my donkey."
Maybe that's why he lived so long.
Just
not a lot
no
of
anger?
Hatred. Like, anger, sure, but I'm talking like deep-seated hatred, grudges.
Henry Kissinger lived to be 100.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I always look at it where it's like, whenever they ask these people who are like celebrating like a fucking centennial or whatever, and they're just like, "Hey man, how'd you get so fucking old?" And they're always like, "I don't know. I drink and smoke and I think about death." And it's like, man, why are you alive? It's always those people. It's never the healthy ones. I don't. Maybe I will live to 100. Fuck the haters. Like, Richard even tried to egg on George Dawson in the beginning by asking him about his former employer, a guy named Mr. Little, someone who stiffed George in the early days and forced him to eat his food with the dogs.
Was this like George's working employer as a small child?
He was a teenager during the Mr. Little years. I don't think that this was his first employer on like the hog farm, but I'm pretty sure this guy was like teenage years, yeah. And Richard asked him, if Mr. Little were here right now, what would you say to him?
Fuck you.
And George just says, quote, "If Mr. Little were here right now, I would give him a big hug."
Aww.
And Richard's like, "Dude, what?" But George explains.
In order to like trick him into like
for me
getting
to
close and then giving him a fucking wedgie.
Yeah. No, but George explains
False
it.
sense of security.
He says, "Son, that man taught me how to work hard and gave me the opportunity to know what it is to be alone. And for the rest of my life, I have never been afraid of hard work. And in this long life, I've buried 4 wives, 1 daughter, 13 brothers and sisters, and most of my friends."
Wait, 13 brothers and sisters. So really his mother had 14.
I'm honestly not sure if he was just so old at this point that he remembers that there were 13 of them all together, and he accidentally included himself. I've thought about that as well. Anyway, to continue to quote, "There have been times that I have had to be alone. Because of Mr. Little, I learned to be alone, but not lonely." So at this point...
Lesson.
Huh?
It's an important lesson, I suppose.
Yeah.
How to be alone, but not lonely.
No, I like that quote, yeah.
Loneliness is killer.
So at this point, Richard Glaubman already knows he'll be helping George write his memoirs. So he asks George about all these historical events and what it must have been like to witness them. But really, George didn't seem to know a whole lot about history. So Richard ends up taking George back to his hometown of Marshall, Texas, about a 150-mile journey, and has him sift through the town newspapers from back when he was a little kid. But as he's looking through all these stories, he's like, I didn't know about any of this. But then he looks at the pictures a little closer and he says, quote, "Ah, that explains it. This is white news. All these pictures and stories are about what's happening in their lives, but no one mentions anything about the lynchings." George says that the difference between white news and black news was that white news was world events, history, stuff in textbooks. Black news was finding out that your friend's brother got killed by a mob. So when George is asked about something like World War I, he's like, quote, "People must have liked that Archduke a whole lot for the world to start going to war. Richard said it was more about honor and power and politics. I told him, sounds like what white folks would do then."
Yeah. Yep.
Together, Richard and George would sit down and write his life story. But as Richard read back the first chapter in the book about Pete Spillman's lynching, he saw George cry. And he was like, shit, maybe this was a bad idea. But George tells him, quote, "No, keep going. This needs to be said." With the book now a full-blown autobiography, Richard got a much easier response from publishers. In particular, from Random House, which is typically the publisher you have to work a while to get to. And excitedly, Richard sent the contract to George, but over the coming weeks, the contract never makes its way back to him. He calls up George's son, Junior, who just says he won't sign it. He won't tell me why. So Richard ends up going down to Texas himself.
He can read now. I'm trying
to fuck him out. It's a fucked up contract.
Is it? Is it a fucked up contract?
No. Well, I don't know, actually. So Richard ends up going down to Texas himself to speak with George face to face. But all he say was, quote, "They took Pete Spillman, they hung him, they drug him, and they burned him." Over and over again. Richard came to the realization that George had gone his entire life without ever saying no to a white man, but this was as close as he was willing to get. Basically, George had lived an entire century of people taking advantage of him, and as much as he could understand the contract, he felt like it was about to happen again. But Richard told him this wouldn't be a white man and a black man signing a contract separately. This would be two men of equal standing signing together. And with that, George signed. The only
thing... He just wasn't used to thinking of himself as an equal.
Yeah, basically. And I mean, after literally 100 years of getting fucked over by contracts, you know, he was like, behavior. I can read it and I know what it says, but like...
In spirit, I know they're going to fuck me over.
Yeah, it's like, how can I not expect this? But as it turned out, the only thing that seemed to matter to George was making sure that the book people seemed nice. Like, he met the people from Random House, and he was like, they seem sweet. I'm okay with this. And that kind of won him over. He's just the nicest dude that we have ever covered on this podcast.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's
really true. Holy shit.
Yeah, it is.
Everybody else you've talked to me about when you like are in the research process, they're all fucking assholes. The only exceptions really, I think, are like the women that you've covered, like Jane Austen wasn't an asshole, just kind of a normal dippy teenager, maybe.
Okay, we don't know that she wasn't a bitch because they burned all of her fucking letters.
True.
and it was apparently because she was spicy.
That sounds like more of a Cassandra problem, a Cassandra Austen problem, but like Harper Lee doesn't sound like she's a huge asshole.
Harper Lee seemed cool as shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Was Willa Cather an asshole?
I don't think so.
Because it seems like majority of the male authors you cover are assholes.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong.
Well-documented assholes.
Well, in early 2000, at the age of 102, George Dawson and Richard Globman released a memoir of George's life titled Life is So Good by Random House. George Dawson once again...
Sorry. Life is so good. It's so very... What was that one? The Holocaust movie? Principe Sa.
Oh, Life is Beautiful. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Sure, true. But no, I mean, like, I think that really stands to him, though. I mean, it is also, like, that's why I mentioned it in the beginning, was, like, his first memory going out to town with his dad. And his dad tells him, life is good. Like, life is so good, you know, right before a lynching happens. And so it's like, yeah, it kind of calls back to that. But it's like, this dude is so fucking happy-go-lucky where it's like, no matter all the bullshit that he saw, all the times he got absolutely fucked by everyone, and he's just like, he's like, yeah, he was like, yeah, and I buried all my fucking kids,
I guess,
and he's
you're
like,
right, he could have one wrong move, he could have just been
absolutely
like that boy,
yeah, and he knew that too, and honestly, I think that's why he was happy-go-lucky. He was like,
hate that, like, it could be worse, you could be murdered.
I know, and I've always hated that phrase of like, well, you know, it could be worse. And it's like, yes, thank you, asshole. It still doesn't stop my tire from being flat. But it's like, to him, it's like, yeah, no, it could be worse. I've seen it. And it's this is fine. Yeah, it's like, you know what? I appreciate you, George. You can say it all you fucking want. So George Dawson once again became the poster child of literacy in America with the release of this book. They did the rounds at several book festivals where George Dawson found a love for being able to sign his own name.
Aww.
As they toured around the country, though, he and Richard found a couple situations where they were either out of cash or needed something a little extra, and George would always step in, like, to whoever. Like, they were at a I think a hotel that they were supposed to have booked, and they didn't. And George would always just be like, hang on a moment. Here, give me the book. Because his face is on it, you know.
Oh, yeah,
and he'd go up, and he'd be in book in hand. He'd always be like, excuse me, maybe you haven't heard of me. I'm George Dawson. And it would work every fucking time. So he still got it, basically. Yeah, but he's just this charming old man with his face on a book, and they'd be like, you're the old bastard that just learned how to read. You're adorable. And they would just give him whatever. Like, if they needed,
have a sandwich.
Yeah,
have a free night at our hotel. Oh, it's so cold out. Please warm up by the fire.
Yeah, it would work every fucking time.
Well, what are you going to do?
When they did a stop in George's old town of Marshall, him and Richard Globman, it turned out there were descendants of the people he used to know. They would be like, hey, you remember that neighbor kid you used to play with, Aiden Cole? That's my fucking grandpa. And these kids, though, these grandkids, they'd still be in their fucking 70s. You know, because he's still old as shit. Like, or like
but they were in the right mindset to like want to reminisce and please talk to me about old memories you have of my family.
Yeah, they'd be like, you remember that old man? I'm his grandson.
Thank you for putting that into perspective, because immediately I'm just thinking about like young kids.
Yeah.
Like, oh, like,
no, they're all grandfathers themselves. Yeah. Or like there was somebody that was like, hey, you know that your family's old farm? We own that now. It went to your cousin back in the day, and we're like their descendants, so like we're related, you know. But at one festival, George and Richard were being introduced by LeVar Burton.
Wow.
And while Richard was starstruck, while George was starstruck, George just told him, quote, I like those boots. They look solid. And then he just moved on. And LeVar Burton kind of seemed like, I'm fucking LeVar Burton. What? You know, like, how are you not impressed by that?
You liked your boots, LeVar. It's
okay. They look solid. That's all right. It's a good enough, you know.
Yeah.
Well, with his new bit of fame, George was able to get his old house torn down and a new one built in just 90 days.
Wow.
For sure, because the construction company knew it would be good, like, publicity.
Yeah.
But when Richard showed up to take a look at it, fucking Martin Luther King III, Martin Luther King Jr.'s son, was there doing a documentary of some kind on George.
Oh.
But when I looked it up, I couldn't find any trace of it, so like I'm kind of assuming it just never came to fruition somehow.
Or maybe it was just like lost in time, maybe?
It wasn't that long ago. It's 20 years ago, and I can't find anything about it.
20 years ago?
Yeah.
It was the early 2000s?
23 years ago, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So this was like late 90s?
No, this is like the year 2000, 2001.
Jesus.
I know, yeah.
Stop.
You old bitch. So anyway,
no.
George Dawson was living a pretty goddamn lavish lifestyle in his final stretch. Even said Random House wanted him to write another book, which came as a surprise to Richard Globman since they never asked him. But unfortunately, a second novel would never come to pass, as just a year and a half after the release of Life is So Good in April of 2001, George Dawson would suffer a stroke and collapse in his home.
Oh.
Just a few months later, on July 5th, he would pass away at the Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas at the age of 103. Dang. A year later, in 2002, the small town of Southlake, Texas, about 25 miles west of Dallas, would name Dawson Middle School in his honor. In 2022, Life is So Good would be challenged by Dawson Middle School as not appropriate for the 7th grade curriculum.
Those fuckers. Fuck's sake. Yeah. Definitely the fucking South.
While there isn't much out there about whether or not the school district was successful in banning the book, I literally just looked before this episode and there's still no update on it from since 2022. When the story broke, the superintendent quickly said they were not banning the book, just that they were, you know, looking at its content.
They were upset at that a black man was calling out white people for being pieces of shit.
No, Nicole, I don't think that you understand.
Oh. Yes. Please tell me, Mr. White Man,
this is the state.
A person of color, a woman of color, does not
that fucked with their textbooks to not let anyone know why Rosa Parks was doing what she did. They made it seem like it was just circumstantial and not to be made a point. They were just like, oh, I don't know, she was being uppity. So, yeah. So, I'm not going to necessarily trust that they didn't ban this. I don't know for sure, though. Though giving kids a watered-down version of the truth is exactly what Texas does anyway. I would like to point out, though, that the Southlake School District is the same one that said we need to teach both sides of the story when it comes to the Holocaust.
Christ.
Yeah, you remember that? That was them. Unfortunately, The South Lake School District seems to miss the point as to why Dawson even wrote Life is So Good in the first place. As he himself put it, quote, "I want my story to be uplifting for people. The right person reads it, maybe it will make a difference. The world only changes one person at a time." My sources today: Life is So Good by George Dawson and Richard Globman, 2013 Random House trade paperback edition. More Than a Book, A Story of Friendship by Richard Globman, Night Owl Press, 2008. George Dawson's Story, youtube.com. That one's a fun little 7-minute biography that was posted by the George Dawson Middle School YouTube channel a year before they challenged the book publicly.
Wow, they allowed the students to learn about him in the first
Well,
place?
since then, all the comments have been turned off. I wonder why.
Of course.
South Lake Superintendent says district hasn't banned a book by grandson of former slave by Megan Mangrum, August 24, 2022, DallasNews.com and Wikipedia. Yeah, it's just, God, the irony is so fucking thick to ban the book that your middle school is named after, which I'm sure that they were doing a really quick name change anyway to be like, okay, we can't be the 50th Robert E. Lee Middle School, so let's go ahead and just kind of, who's in the news right now?
Davies. Yeah. God.
But yeah, no, this dude, it was a little bit disheartening to see. I was like, I wanted to learn everything about this guy because really all that there is are the handful of interviews that he did. There's his book, Richard Globman's own book, and beyond that, there wasn't like too much. So like, I ended up on like, Goodreads is like the Yelp of books, and it's a fucking shitstorm in there. It sucks. Yeah,
it's a hellscape.
And there were so
like
many
the
people.
Alley of books.
There was so many like 1-star reviews of his book that were just like, look, I understand that's important, but like it's boring. Okay, it's boring. And here's the thing. I know Richard Globman technically helped George Dawson write this book, but George Dawson is very much the author of this book. He didn't just like talk into a fucking microphone for this. He wrote this out. These were his stories. And the thing is, yeah, the guy just learned to fucking read before he decided to write a book. It's not the most, like, poetic, but it's a fantastic book regardless. And to me, it makes it particularly a great read for middle schoolers who need to know these things happen far sooner than high school.
It is an important snapshot of a time when there weren't as many liberties.
Yeah, but it's like it's
civil rights.
It's definitely like a 6th grade, 7th grade reading level type of book. Maybe not on subject matter. Subject matter is not for anyone ever. Like not people who are in their
middle school.
Exactly. It's not
about how shitty we were to fellow citizens.
Yeah, or that
country.
Yeah, exactly. What do you mean? Anyway, so yeah, it's like it's at that reading level that makes it perfect for middle schoolers. And so it's like, yes, this is absolutely like our introduction to this shit was like To Kill a Mockingbird, I think was 6th grade for us. I don't know what it was for you.
9th? Yeah.
Man, our schools were fucking,
very
private schools
different.
Sucked ass, man.
Says you. I got to light a cannon when I was 16.
That was pretty dope.
It's pretty fucking awesome.
We read Ender's Game in 5th grade.
So what? I still lit a cannon.
Fuck, you're right.